with recent polls indicating that former President Donald Trump's grip on GOP voters holding firm. Several Republicans are hoping to chip away at that support and win their party's 2024 presidential nomination. Former Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson is one of them, and he joins me now from Des Moines. Governor, welcome back to the NewsHour. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be with you. Thank you.
So you're in Iowa. It's your 15th visit this year, I understand. Current polling there has you at less percent, and there's about 18 weeks to go before the Iowa caucuses. How do you move up from that 1% between now and then?
Well, we will move up, and whenever you look at my campaign trail, I've been in New Hampshire earlier in the week. I'm in Iowa now, and Iowa is one of those states that, one, they're going to be late deciding. They're sort of lodged with President Trump now, but they're looking for where's the future of the Republican Party. And they're going to make that decision after they meet you face to face. They determine their level of trust with you and your vision of America's future. So that's what I'm engaged in. And so it takes two things to change the poll numbers. One, a realization that following Donald Trump will not have a good ending. And then secondly, you've got to make your case that you're the best alternative to lead this country. And I'll be doing that.
There are a number of the candidates making that same case, as you know. I have to ask you about the National Review last week that ran an editorial calling for you to end your campaign. It was titled Drop Out Asa. They cite your support numbers. They say other candidates have similar policy positions as you, and they put it this way, quote, "We believe that his heart is in the right place, and the way to demonstrate it in these circumstances is to gracefully bow out." What do you say to that, Governor?
Well, I say that's one voice that's in the minority, and the case ought to be made by the National Review that Donald Trump should drop out of the race. He's the one that's facing 4 indictments, and he's the one that people are following, and is not leading to good conclusions. He's the one that will lead us to disaster in 2024. I'd refer you to the Boston Globe that did a very favorable editorial talking about me being one of the winners of the last debate and urging folks in New Hampshire to make sure that I get the 3% necessary to be on the next debate stage. So I think the voice is clear out there that what I'm saying is important to the future of the party and for providing an alternative to the disastrous future that Donald Trump will bring our party.
Speaking of that last debate stage, you were the only one to raise your hand when the candidates were asked if you believe that human behavior is causing climate change, which, as you know, is a huge issue for younger voters. So you have been saying America needs to move towards what you call reasonable constraints on carbon emissions. So give us an example of that. What would a President Hutchinson consider to be a reasonable constraint?
Well, first of all, that is, let's produce energy, but do it in the most environmentally friendly way. And so we can't do away with our fossil fuel production. I'm sorry, that's just not realistic in today's world, but let's produce and in an environmentally sensitive way the energy that we need in our country from a variety of sources. And I happen to disagree completely with President Biden's decision yesterday to suspend development and production of oil from the reserves that we have in the northern Alaskan reserves.
But, sir, if I may, how would you lower emissions, which everyone agrees is a key way to address the climate change crisis?
Well, we're doing that. The United States has reduced emissions, and first of all, like in Arkansas, we're utilizing nuclear. We need to continue to utilize nuclear fuel as an option for us. We have generated increased reliance upon solar and the alternative energy sources that we need. And so it has to be all of these, but we are moving even in the production of gas, and whether we utilize other energy sources, we're doing it in a more better way that does not release the same level of CO2s, and that's what we have to do. But let's produce. We have to be energy independent and energy dominant.
If I can ask to clarify your position on one issue around abortion. I know previously in 2022 you'd said that you oppose a national ban because it's inconsistent with the goal of returning the issue to the states. In an interview earlier this year on Fox, though, you seemed to indicate that you would sign a 15-week ban. So just to clarify for Americans, would President Hutchinson sign a 15-week ban if it made it to your desk?
Well, the answer is that it would have to have reasonable exceptions in there before I would consider it. And as to exactly whether there's a consensus in our country, you mentioned the difference in my comments. I actually read the Dodd's decision more carefully, and it's pointed out that it didn't just return it to the states, but it returned it to our elected representatives. And I do believe that it's going to remain with the states because, as a practical matter, we don't have that consensus developed nationally, and Congress will not act. And so it's theoretical. If they did, with the reasonable restrictions and reasonable exceptions, I would sign it, as you said, but I expect it to be left at the state level. And that's going to be the case for some time until a consensus is developed.
Governor, you were a former federal prosecutor, and I do want to ask you about the news that federal prosecutors will be seeking an indictment against Hunter Biden by the end of this month. As you know, House Republicans are making Hunter Biden a big part of their continuing push to potentially impeach President Biden. Do you think that that push to impeach is the right move?
Well, there's enough concern and lack of transparency that they need to determine whether in Hunter Biden's business dealings, whether the president received any benefit from that. That is the question, or whether it changed any policies on his part. And that's inappropriate conduct, whether it's his vice president or whether it's his president. And so there's a legitimate area to inquire. They're certainly not to the point of doing articles of impeachment. But those questions need to be answered for confidence that we have in our chief executive. Hunter Biden is in a world by himself, but if there is that connection and that's transference of money or other benefits to Joe Biden, then that has to be investigated.
You know, looking back at the wider Republican field right now, former President Trump continues to lead by a wide margin. You have said that you don't believe he will be the nominee. Why do you believe that when all the evidence we've seen so far points to the opposite?
You know, there's an interesting poll that's out today that talks about how the alternatives to Donald Trump can actually win against Joe Biden. And that's one measure that the Republicans are looking for, who can win. And then secondly, the last debate that we had showcased that we had 8 Republicans on the stage, and I'm ready to lead as president, and the public saw that. And so there's a growing confidence that we are ready for an alternative. I think you'll see those numbers change as time goes on.
Former Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Good to be with you.